Bringing the new meta, it is time to talk about who are the winners and who are the losers in the newly released patch 6.11. So patch 6.11 brought in a ton of changes centered around PvP, and that means that it's time for me to redo my tier list. Of course, this is going to be many days since the patch released, because to be honest, I really wanted to get down and dirty and actually test the different jobs and see how they work, how they go against me, and now I finally feel really comfortable with what I'm about to tell you here. So let's start off with the busted broken super OP tier. Starting off with White Mage. Now people might have thought that the nerf to White Mage's ultimate and its Afflatus Misery damage was enough, and I can absolutely say that these nerfs have changed absolutely nothing. White Mage's ultimate still recharges insanely fast and does so much. 1 second less duration on the stun sounds good on paper, but in practice doesn't stop the utter curb stomping of people. There's no denying at this point that White Mage is extremely strong still. So much so that this actually is impacting the ranking of the other healers on this list, because you are more likely to queue against a White Mage if you queue in as literally any other healer, and White Mage is just that good. Next up should come as absolutely no surprise to anyone either. Warrior is still insanely strong, and like before, paired up with a White Mage is intensely, as the children would say, problematic. 15-second AoE stun gap closer is being able to break enemy guard through their ultimate, being able to CC and drag enemies to them. Absolutely no question in my mind, Warrior isn't dropping from this tier and is still performing extremely well. Maybe they're a tiny bit more squishy, but in practice you don't really care that much. Next up is S tier, which are some of the strongest picks that you can make while not utterly shattering the game like White Mage and Warrior. They are still insanely strong, do not get me wrong, but they are not actually warping the game where you actually are like, well, if I pick another healer, I'm probably going against White Mage and I'm probably going to be smashed into oblivion. And first up on this is Dragoon, that simply hasn't changed from before. It brings an ultimate that can wipe a payload clean, a ton of damage baseline. Without its ultimate, it is very sticky on targets and can eat an extreme amount of punishment with its mitigations. It's very hard to go wrong picking the Dragoon currently, so much so that it's inching into that previous tier of ultra ridiculously broken, in my personal opinion. Next up is Samurai, who did get some nerfs to their survivability as well as minor stun time decrease that opened them up to be punished a bit more, where they could honestly before be stupidly durable just like the Dragoon is. Samurai remains exceptionally strong, and their limit break during overtime remains the most surefire way to decimate the enemy team and force a win. To conclude this tier, Ninja didn't actually get nerfs, but instead a quality of life improvement, so the Ninja played properly is still easily an S tier. Now we're in A tier, which are extremely solid picks, but not necessarily game breaking. Red Mage is leading the pack here in spite of minor nerfs, the most significant of which is the 1 second less duration of silence, down from 3 to 2 seconds. Regardless, the silence is extremely available, and alongside Warrior and White Mage can lock down the entire team for, in my opinion, far too long when timed properly. Does anyone else remember when people were telling me to put it in C tier and how wrong I was? Hell no. Knew that wasn't right, and it still isn't right. Red Mage definitely deserves this spot. Next up is the Bard that somehow got buffs. It was already really good in my opinion, and I did a video focus on Bard and how to play it on this channel. Bard, to be quite frank, is obscenely great right now, especially when you're on a team with jobs that have broken limit breaks like anything that we see in S tier or above. Red Mage already gets their LB pretty quick, why not make it quicker? Then therefore they can spam it, what, every minute? Something crazy like that. To be clear, Bard's personal damage is horrendous, but the utility that they bring is beyond any doubt strong as it gets. Behind Bard is going to be the Machinist that actually got buffs to its shield utility for the team, as well as minor damage in AoE. It was already a solid pick for its ability to force a 5 versus 4 by unloading quite literally everything onto the enemy's White Mage, prioritizing a target that can secure that team fight, unless your team is truly bad, that is, and can't win a 5 versus 4. This definitely happens. While the buffs that the Machinist got aren't necessarily helping their target prioritization goal, it makes the Machinist offer a bit more elsewhere. Next up is the Scholar, and this might be a little controversial because yeah, you are still going to be queuing against White Mages when you pick Scholar, and that is going to definitely hurt because White Mage is still so strong. But I do want to say that the Scholar does belong in A tier in my opinion, and this is a solid increase from the last tier list. Scholar desperately needed its catalyzed damage bonus as well as its Violysis damage reduction for enemies to have its timings matched up to that 15-second mark. Prior to this buff, they were at 2/3 of the duration at 10 seconds. But now with these buffs, the Scholar feels like it just offers a lot. It feels what you would kind of hoped for at the start. Which, saying that the Scholar offers a lot and belongs in A tier is a bit surprising because the current meta focuses on bursts with stuns and silences and massive heavy hitting ults, like what you see in S tier and above. but the Scholar really does help numb this. Going into more detail than I would normally go in a tier list video, a well-timed expedient with a Biolysis really dampens burst, and Scholar has the strongest healing kit with Seraph, which really makes it that Scholar helps prevent that burst even further with that ult and can manage it significantly better. So not getting into the fact that outside of just mitigating burst and burst control is that the damage over time effects that you can spread as a Scholar as well as mummification really truly messes with opponents quite a lot. So in my opinion, it is a well-deserved A tier for the Scholar. People are sleeping on Scholar. Why are you sleeping on Scholar? But I do want to bring up, unfortunately, if you do queue as a Scholar, you likely will be against a White Mage, which is the only reason I actually want to put Scholar in B tier. White Mage burst may be easier to manage, like I said, but if they have a Warrior and Red Mage or Dragoon to follow up properly with good timing, you're going to be decimated even with everything out. And that includes your Seraph ult. Now into B tier, and first up is Black Mage, which is very interesting because it has completely impressed me compared to before with its buffs. I think that in terms of how good it is that it is still very hard relative to other jobs to pull out its full potential. But if it is allowed to, the Black Mage will do a lot of work, not just in terms of raw damage, but with freeze with its crowd control. It is a very, very powerful effect that does really feed into the burst silence stun meta because you're freezing the enemies. It's very, very strong. But the problem is, in general, in this with White Mage, Warrior, Dragoon world, Black Mage does fold like paper. Ethereal Manipulation, I do want to also take note of here. It's fantastic on paper, but again, in practice in solo queue PvP, it is rough to get the most value out of because you are dependent on your teammates. It is, and you don't really want to be jumping to enemies. Oh, hey, Mr. Dragoon, let me just get up in your face. I just got impaled, blah. While I want to put it higher because I do think it offers a lot, it just folds. Next up is the Gunbreaker. That has noticeably gone so much better, not losing the buff that you choose and being able to sprint in the faces of enemies, and so much more makes them very solid. They are sticky and a bit scary. Your ultimate, if ignored by the enemy team, can be devastating and stack up with the silent stun meta itself like White Mage and Warrior. The Gunbreaker fits in. The problem with it, why it's not higher, is that its own damage isn't extremely spectacular. It is intimidating if a Gunbreaker is running after you on a Black Mage, but it also doesn't provide CC outside of its ultimate. I haven't seen many successful Gunbreakers even after the buffs, if I'm to be quite honest. Compared to Warrior, it is just not at that same level. It's not bad, like what we're going to talk about later, but it is way better than before, but still, it's not Warrior. Now Summoner, I bumped down here because honestly they haven't seemed to be doing as well with the current meta. The ultimate does do fantastic burst, the Ifrit melee combo does solid AoE burst as well, but outside of that, they aren't really offering that much. They are still needing to cast, they're still relatively squishy and easily penalized. Obviously being B tier isn't bad though, even though B for bad, but the Summoner still is really good because it does bring some solid AoE damage, but the problem is not much more. Phoenix is not even what you'd necessarily want to use because while it does offer some healing, utility, it just usually doesn't do as much as Bahamut outside of some fringe situations. Let's talk about C tier for a quick moment. C tier and lower are just jobs that are simply overshadowed by other role counterparts. Pick them if you enjoyed them, but I haven't seen many successful roles. First off is going to be the Sage, which is the best of these. Solid mobility, solid damage, and solid damage amps that contribute to burst. However, its ultimate is largely ignorable in the current meta, and Samurai and Dragoon ulting doesn't really give a damn about it and will shred you off at the point. So just not enough pressure like the Scholar or tools to manage that incoming flux of burst, so you're likely going to be matched against a White Mage, and because unfortunately you decide to queue as a healer that isn't a White Mage, you're probably going to end up regretting it as Sage. Next up here is going to be placed here because of that same regret of queuing as a healer that is a White Mage feeling. It's going to be the Astro, which has great utility against melee compositions with its AoE root, but if time and matchmaking has proven anything, is that the Ass will be crawled all over. Its burst management to reduce incoming damage also isn't as good as Scholar's. Macrocosmos is incredible on paper or against compositions with less burst, but against burst it's just bad because if you're dead, Macrocosmos won't save you. Now D tier for Dancer with the buffs, it's still not impressive, but it is alright for its ultimate. However, Dan's partner doesn't feel great, especially in solo queue when you have abilities to help the partner that are usually pointless depending on how bad your teammates are. Whilst it's also very small in radius for PvP, makes sense in PvE, but not for PvP here. Be boosted by like 10 yards. For F tier, if you're looking for the difficulty of Dark Souls and Final Fantasy XIV PvP. Cloud buffs aren't enough to make it great. Dark Knight will queue against Warrior, which feels miserable. Reaper is largely able to be ignored because it will do spectacular combos, but it takes so much time to build it up. In theory, with its ultimate, you'd think it would pair up nicely with Warrior and White Mage, but in practice, it's just so much less than Dragoon or Samurai in every respect. Monk. that's all. Yeah, that's it for the current tier list for 6.11. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, if this video helped you or you appreciate my speed talking, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a glorious PvP and Cat Daddy on that like button and Cat Daddy that subscribe button. Take care, everyone, and happy PvP.